Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Yochanan El Rome.
And I'm Rebecca Rand.
In our top story, Israelis might be headed back to the polls for the fourth time in 2 years. The Knesset opposition has advanced a motion to dissolve the current coalition with the support of Benny Gantz's Blue and White Party. Gantz and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made an agreement to form a unity government 6 months ago, but the unstable partnership has apparently failed by the non-passage of the state budget. The government remains at a stalemate in the midst of a global pandemic, which has forced the Jewish state into several nationwide lockdowns. Rebecca has more on the coronavirus situation here in the Holy Land.
Yes, Yochanan, the Knesset is weighing increased measures to curb the rising morbidity rate of coronavirus that has resulted from the partial opening of schools and the economy. Israel received its first 100,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine on Thursday in a pilot transport, which required cold storage of -94 degrees Fahrenheit. Israel has set up a national vaccine storage center from which the medication will be sent to distribution stations throughout the country. Jerusalem has already announced that healthcare workers, the elderly, and citizens at especially high risk will be the first to receive the immunization.
Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has reportedly transferred power to his son. The 81-year-old dictator has been in failing health, and those close to him are concerned over his deteriorating condition. But there's a problem. The next Iranian leader is supposed to be chosen by the Assembly of Experts, a panel of 88 Ayatollahs. Therefore, the rumored appointment of Khamenei's son, Saeed, could be considered illegal, as it goes against the country's laws regarding succession. The radical Islamic Republic is reeling from crippling U.S. sanctions, punishing the regime for its continued illegal nuclear proliferation and the recent assassination of the director of its rogue nuclear program. The Islamic Revolutionary Guards announced that the deadly attack on Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was highly advanced. They believe that a satellite-controlled machine gun with artificial intelligence used facial recognition to confirm the target before eliminating the mastermind of Iran's atomic weapons program. The technology was so precise that his wife, who was sitting less than 10 inches away, was left unscathed.
6 Israeli border guards were injured while executing an arrest warrant of a gang of car thieves operating out of an Arab neighborhood in Jerusalem. Upon seeing the Israeli officers, the villagers rioted and threw huge cinder blocks and washing machines from rooftops onto the troops below. 6 Israeli border guards were injured and several had to be hospitalized. In May of this year, 21-year-old Amit Ben Yagal was killed after he was struck in the head by a concrete slab thrown from the roof of a building in Jenin.
WaterGen, the technology that pulls clean, cold drinking water out of thin air, has signed an agreement with a company based in Abu Dhabi. The Emirati firm Aldara announced a partnership with the Israeli water from air startup. Aldara said WaterGen systems would be installed in the agricultural sector, hotels, apartments, office buildings, and industrial plants in the UAE, as well as in other countries in the region. In September, U.S. President Donald Trump brokered the Abraham Accords, which saw the normalization of ties between the United Arab Emirates and the Jewish state, paving the way for cooperation on numerous fronts. WaterGen's president and CEO, Mikhail Miralashvili, said, "With this agreement, we're showing our two nations and the world what is possible with peace." In related news of continued cooperation, an Emirati royal has purchased a 50% share in Jerusalem's beloved soccer team, Beitar Yerushalayim. Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al Nahyan said he's honored to be a partner in such an esteemed club in such a city, the capital of Israel, and one of the holiest cities in the world.
An Israeli humanitarian delegation is on the ground in Honduras, providing aid and relief after 2 devastating hurricanes hit the Central American country. Defense Minister Benny Gantz and Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi announced the deployment of the aid mission led by the head of the IDF Homefront Command, Major General Uri Gordon. 15 members of the elite unit will be focusing their efforts on the northwestern part of the country, which was heavily damaged by the storms. The Jewish state considers Honduras one of its most strategic allies. It consistently supports Israel in international forums and recently announced the decision to relocate its embassy to the Israeli capital of Jerusalem.
Former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley has called on the White House to declassify a report on Palestinian refugees receiving aid from the UN Relief and Works Agency. In 2018, the Trump administration cut funding to UNRWA, calling it an irredeemably flawed operation. Critics of the program say it's working to perpetuate the Palestinian refugee problem rather than solve it. In 2012, Congress required the U.S. State Department to release a report which details the numbers of Palestinian refugees that were alive in 1948 and who are receiving aid from the UN organization. An article recently printed in the New York Post noted that the report could prove that UNRWA has kept Palestinians in poverty and encouraged multiple generations of helpless people to remain erroneously identified as refugees, and that would upend the mythology of a Palestinian right of return.
Israelis excitedly welcomed the news of the first snowfall in the northern part of the country. Israel's only ski resort on Mount Hermon reported 5 centimeters of new snow last week at the upper level of the site. The water level in the Sea of Galilee rose by 1.5 centimeters. Israel's beloved Lake Kinneret is just 1 meter from reaching its full capacity.
The Israel Allies Foundation and the European Christian Political Movement held a conference on the positive global impact of the Abraham Accords. The online conference was headlined by Israeli member of Knesset, Michal Kotler-Wunsch, and was attended by parliamentarians from across Europe. The IAF coordinates the efforts of 46 Israel Allies caucuses around the world, and every year it hosts an annual event in Brussels at the European Parliament, focusing on EU policy regarding Israel. The global pandemic forced this year's event to go online, but at the same time allowed it to open up to a wider audience, including lawmakers from governments throughout Europe, including Finland, Spain, Holland, the Czech Republic, and Wales. Josh Reinstein, the president of the Israel Allies Foundation, addressed the conference where he emphasized the importance of the role that Bible-believing Christian parliamentarians play in the development of peace in the Middle East.
The Jewish people are in the midst of celebrating Hanukkah, known as the Festival of Lights. This 8-day holiday commemorates a miracle God performed in Israel when the Greek Empire attempted to paganize the Jews by profaning the Holy Temple and outlawing Shabbat. In those days, a group of faithful Jews chose to fight for their freedom to worship the one true God, and in return, He was faithful and made the small Jewish army victorious over the mighty Greek Empire. The Maccabees entered Jerusalem, purified the temple, and reinstated the practice of Judaism in the land of Israel. Hanukkah is a celebration of the miracles that God performed in those days in order to restore His people to His covenant in His holy city. Jews around the world will light Hanukkah candles tonight and remember that God's light will shine from Jerusalem forever.
We are living in mysterious yet miraculous times. We've witnessed the most remarkable fulfillment of biblical prophecy, the Jewish people's return to Israel, and the prosperity and contributions of this tiny country in such a short time. Yet we've also seen an unexpected rise in anti-Semitism, which takes the form of anti-Zionism and alliances between groups that are fighting against the most fundamental biblical values. In the book Titus, Trump, and the Triumph of Israel, Josh Reinstein answers important questions to clarify what has driven political action from the time that the Roman Emperor Titus destroyed Jerusalem until today, when President Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Get your copy today and learn how faith-based diplomacy has changed the world. To order your advance copy, go to triumphofisrael.com.
That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Sam Grundwerg, the world chairman of Keren HaYesod. Sam, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me back, Josh.
Sam, give us a little brief history. What is Keren HaYesod?
Keren HaYesod, which literally means the foundation fund, is one of Israel's national institutions established 100 years ago in 1920 in order to help realize the Zionist dream and raise funds from around the world in order to establish the modern-day state of Israel.
You've been very busy this year, especially with what's happening in the coronavirus. One of your main fields is Aliyah, Jews moving from around the world to Israel. Tell us about what's happening.
Aliyah, which is one of our core areas of activity, is on the rise. First of all, since our establishment and the establishment of the State of Israel, Keren HaYesod has brought 3.5 million olim, or new immigrants, to Israel. But especially now with what's going on in the world, both the pandemic and also the rise in anti-Semitism, there's been a tremendous peak in interest in Aliyah from all over the world. To give you an idea, last year, before Corona, there were about 35,000 olim, or new immigrants, coming to Israel. And the anticipation for the coming years is that there will be somewhere along the lines of 50,000 a year.
We're hearing a lot about Aliyah from different places around the world, but the most big excitement is really the Ethiopian Aliyah. It's coming back in a big way, expecting to have 2,000 Ethiopian Jews back in Israel by the end of the year. Tell us a little bit about that.
It's a huge story, Josh, and it really represents the story of the Jewish people. There are thousands of Jews that are still in Ethiopia waiting to come home to their ancestral homeland, waiting to be reunited with their families. It's an amazing story. They come from the tribe of Dan, and they've been able to preserve their Judaism all these thousands of years. The government here in Israel took a decision very recently to bring the rest of those 8,000 home to Israel. And we're underway with plans together with the State of Israel, with the Jewish Agency, to bring the first 2,000, hopefully by the end of this year or the first quarter of next year, and then to bring the remaining 6,000. So it's an unbelievable development, and it's really, we're seeing the fulfillment of biblical prophecy before our very eyes.
At the same time, we're hearing a lot of reports of Russian Jews, Ukrainian Jews coming back to Israel because of the rise of anti-Semitism. How is anti-Semitism affecting Aliyah from those areas of the world?
Anti-Semitism has a lot to do with the rise that we're seeing in interest in Aliyah. It's having quite an impact. I can tell you, I follow on a daily and weekly basis flights coming into Israel, and it's amazing to think, Josh, that even since the beginning of this pandemic, since March, there have been at least 10 or 12,000 olim, or new immigrants, that have continued to come from the Ukraine, from Mexico, from Brazil. We've been receiving flights even during this pandemic.
You mentioned Mexico and Brazil. That has a lot to do with the coronavirus. We're seeing a huge wave of Jews from Latin America coming to Israel, coming for a better life, for better medical care. How is that affecting the Aliyah stats?
So it's really a mix. In certain countries, as you said, it has a lot to do with the anti-Semitism and the growth in anti-Semitism. And in other countries, it has to do with a combination of the way that Israel, more recently, of course, has been able to increase and improve the situation here with the numbers of corona, and the fact that, unfortunately, in other places like Mexico and Brazil, where the pandemic and the numbers there are really very high, it's also making Jews and Jewish community members think twice about making Aliyah, returning to their ancestral homeland. So I think it's a combination of the factors.
You're looking at a perfect storm here. You got the Ethiopian Aliyah, you got anti-Semitism in Europe, you got the coronavirus Aliyah coming as well. How are you coping with this massive increase in numbers? You're talking about 35,000 last year, 60,000 next year. How are you coping with this incredible demand?
It's a tremendous challenge. In order to bring these thousands of new immigrants every year, the financial resources that are necessary are tremendous. There's costs in preparing and, of course, bringing these new immigrants, and then, of course, the whole absorption process and integration. It costs a lot of money, millions and multi-millions of dollars. And that's exactly why we're reaching out to our friends around the world, especially our Christian Zionist friends around the world. And we're asking for help. We're asking, especially during these historic times of biblical proportion, we're asking to not just witness the fulfillment of biblical prophecy, but to take an active part to be a part, and we're asking for help. It's going to cost a lot of money, and we're resolute to make it happen.
You know, Keren Hayesod has always been kind of like a Jewish wealthy investor group, millions of Jews putting money in, but it's changed recently. Now a lot of Bible-believing Christians are getting involved. They're raising big amounts of money. Are you seeing them answer this call?
We are, and it's really heartwarming to see them answer the call. You know, as I mentioned, we're around for 100 years. We work in over 45 countries, 60-something campaigns or communities. And in the last few years, as you mentioned, the growth with the involvement of our friends of Israel, our Christian Zionist friends, has been unbelievable. And all over the world, from Europe to Latin America, of course, to the Far East, all over the world, they are answering this call. But it's important that I get this message out and that they hear about what's going on, about the Aliyah, about the rise in anti-Semitism, and about these recent developments and the government decision here in Israel, which is historic. And I want to ask them all to take part.
It's really historic, and it's a global thing. We hear of people from China bringing home the Ethiopian Jews, and churches in America that are tithing into helping the Jewish people come home from the Ukraine, and the list goes on and on. Why do you think Christians are responding to this call of Aliyah?
Well, I think, first of all, I think that there's always been between Christians and Jews shared Judeo-Christian values. But if you look at what's happened over the last 100 years, which is about as long as my organization has been around, you go back a little bit further to 1917 and the Balfour Declaration, and then San Remo, and all these historic events that led to, which were all, of course, miracles, that led to the establishment of the modern-day state of Israel. I think our Christian friends around the world, as they were witnessing these events, realized that we're really seeing the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. We're seeing the ingathering of the nations. We're seeing that the Jewish people who have been in exile for more than 2,000 years now have a chance to come back to their ancestral homeland. And I think our Christian friends, seeing all of this happen, it's brought together the Jewish communities and the Christian communities around the world, and we are seeing them answer that call, but we'd like to see more of them answer that call.
Sam, what's the future of Aliyah? We're seeing Aliyah happen in North America. We're seeing it happen in Europe, in Russia, in Africa, in the B'nai Menashe. I mean, we're seeing Jews come back from all the corners of the earth as it was foretold. But what's going to happen in the next 10 years? Are the majority of Jews going to come back to Israel? How do you see this playing out?
Well, the way I see it playing out and the way I hope and pray that it will come out is that I think that the numbers will explode. You know, there's always been two different kinds of Aliyah. There's been Aliyah by necessity, different communities where Jews are persecuted and they're chased away. You mentioned earlier about anti-Semitism and about the COVID pandemic. So there's Aliyah of necessity, and there are relief missions. But there's always also been Aliyah of choice, which is the yearning after generations and generations to return to our ancestral homeland. And the way that we project the numbers here, Keren Hayesod, with the government of Israel and our other partners in the national institutions, the numbers are going to go through the roof, and we have to prepare for that, and it means that we have to prepare for that financially, of course, in terms of infrastructure here in Israel. And I think we definitely will see the majority of the Jews returning to Israel, and hopefully more than the majority.
Sam, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
Well, my first message is a message of gratitude. I want to thank all of you in the viewing audience for your blessings for Israel, for your blessings for the peace of Jerusalem, and your support of Israel. And my second message is, don't just sit on the sidelines and watch and witness. We all see that we're in historic times of biblical proportion. Amazing things are happening. Aliyah, Jews returning from around the world back to their ancestral homeland. I want to invite you and I want to ask you to be a part of it. Take an active part in the fulfillment of biblical prophecy.
Thank you, Sam, for being on the show, and thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, wishing you a happy Hanukkah. Now back to the studio.
Up next, the return to Zion with Keren Hayesod.
Shalom and welcome to the Return to Zion with Keren HaYesod. I'm Sam Grundwerg, World Chairman of Keren HaYesod, the leading official fundraising organization for the State of Israel. The story of the Exodus boat is one of Keren HaYesod's most famous operations. Listen to the first-hand testimony of one of the brave women who fulfilled her biblical destiny by coming home.
As the dark clouds gathered over Europe, the door to the land of Israel was not yet open. Under Arab League pressure, the British ruthlessly restricted Jewish immigration. Keren HaYesod, alongside Jews already in the land of Israel, banded together and launched the clandestine naval operation, codenamed Aliyah Bet, to save their brethren from the clutches of Nazi Germany and bring them to Israel.
כשנגמרה המלחמה התחילו להתארגן יהודים לנסוע בחזרה לפולניה. ההורים שלי החליטו שהם רוצים להגיע לארץ. התחלנו לעבור את כל אירופה לכיוון מרסיי.
With careful organization and ingenuity, these brave souls defied the British authorities. Makeshift, rickety boats set sail from ports across Europe, transporting a wretched human cargo of men, women, and children desperately seeking refuge.
הגיע יום שאספו אותנו והתחלנו להתקדם. זה לקח אולי יום וחצי עד שאנחנו צעדנו בתוך מרסיי, וככה לאט לאט הגענו לאוניית האקזודוס.
Upon its arrival to the port of Haifa, the ship was deported back to Europe, thus making it a symbol of the many hardships Jews had to face during the time of Aliyah, immigrating to their historical homeland.
ראינו את אוניות הבריטים, המשחטות שלהם מסביב כמו דגי טרף כל הזמן, כמו שאנחנו נסענו, הם נסעו. ואז הגיע היום, ראינו שהאוניות מתחילות להתקרב אלינו, וגם ראינו את חיפה, את האורות כבר. וכולם התחילו לשמוח מאוד שרואים אורות, אבל אני מבינה שהיו אנשים שהבינו שמתחיל קרב וזה. הם התחילו לשחק כדורגל, האנגלים עם האונייה. אחד נתן דחיפה ימינה, השני שמאלה, והאונייה התחילה להתפרק כמו לגו. בחיפה הורידו את האנשים, עשו עליהם פליט עם כל הכעס שהיה להם, והעבירו אותנו לאוניות, ל3 אוניות. זו הייתה אוניית אסירים. הם זרקו את כל התרמילים, אנשים נשארו כמו שעלו, בלי בגדים, בלי שום כלום.
Undeterred, the overcrowded, unseaworthy vessels of Aliyah Bet continued to challenge the blockade. Young Jewish fighters, aided by their non-Jewish sailors, succeeded in bringing more than 70,000 Jews home to the land of their forefathers in more than 100 vessels.
עם ישראל צריך להיות כולו בארץ ישראל. זה ראינו בכל הדורות.
Those who made it ashore were swiftly smuggled into the future Jewish state by daring activists from Keren HaYesod and elsewhere. Evading capture, the new arrivals were taken to kibbutzim and other new communities to live as free Jews in their own land, fulfilling the dreams of countless generations before them. And in doing so, they brought to life Zechariah's prophecy, "Not by might and not by power, but by my spirit, saith the Lord."
זה המקום היחיד שאתה יודע שאתה בארץ שלך, על הקרקע שלך, כמו כל עם נורמלי אחר.
To this day, Keren HaYesod is helping Jews around the world come home with the help of Jews and non-Jews alike.
Let's bless Israel together.
Now's the time for you to get involved. Assist Keren HaYesod to raise the necessary funds in order to bring Jews yearning for their homeland back to Israel. Your donation can help fulfill the biblical prophecy today. To donate and get information, visit our website at www.khisrael.org.
Yanis, this is an opportunity to begin a new dawn in the relationship between Slovenia and Israel. I feel like this is the closing line of the movie Casablanca. This is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Your action as Prime Minister shows how deeply committed you are to that vision. Your first visit outside the EU is to Israel, and this is our first meeting, and I think it'll be one of many, and I want to thank you for this commitment and this consistency. So today we're going to sign an agreement on innovation, and I think this is a critical thing that advances our common goal, because the future belongs to those who innovate. Innovation is what creates value. It creates a competitive advantage. It drives forward economies, and we can, I think, help each other's economies and help our citizens by cooperating in innovation, and this is what we're going to sign right here upstairs. In addition, I think there are many, many other areas in AI, in cyber, in trade, in tourism. We already have a sizable number of Israeli tourists visiting Slovenia. There'll be more. I hope to visit you one day as well.
You're welcome.
And I hope it's not in the distant future. And we look forward to using your port in the Adriatic Sea, Koper, to have it as an entry point for Israeli products to Europe as well. So we are well underway going in that direction. I want to thank you for designating Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. Of course it is. I also want to thank you for your support in international forums. And I want to tell you that we in Israel, in Jerusalem, are very excited to host you and your delegation. I think, again, this will be something that people will look back and they'll see what they call an inflection point or a tipping point or whatever else they call it. This is the beginning of a new dawn. So welcome, friend, to Jerusalem.
The biblical prophecy is unfolding right before our very eyes. The people of Israel are returning to the Promised Land after 2,000 years of exile. Bless Israel by supporting Keren Hayesod United Israel Appeal, the leading official fundraising organization for the State of Israel. Together, we can fulfill the prophecy of the Bible. To donate and get information, visit khisrael.org.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Yochanan El-Rom.
And I'm Rebecca Rand, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Please join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.